I think it's important that we understand the timing of this session. We have, for each relation, we have 25 minutes, 15 minutes for the discussant, 15 minutes for the discussion, 5 minutes for replies. I give this timing because they asked me to be severe in looking for the timetable. So the first one is Baffigi, and I should give the title, or you give it yourself?
I can do it myself.
Okay.
Thank you, Guido.
Do it yourself.
Okay. Good afternoon. So, Italian national accounts, 1861-2011. But before starting my presentation, I would like to spend some words about the project. This project was conceived as part of the celebrations of this highly symbolic year, 2011, to support studies in Italy's history throughout her 150 years of life. A new consistent set of data was required to describe the changing features of Italian economy. And our effort was aimed to meet this need. But what I want to stress here is that this project was born, and actually it has grown as a cooperative effort between different institutions. Indeed, it was promoted by 3 institutions: the Italian Central Statistical Office, ISTAT, University of Rome, Tor Vergata, and Banca d'Italia. Also, other scholars joined the project, and this is one novelty of our project. We are proud for it. Cooperation in research. But let me start with my presentation. Our main results, of course, we have a GDP series covering the whole history of Italy at current and constant prices. We estimated supply side sectoral values added. And in what I'm saying in this presentation and what I wrote in the paper, I built upon joint work with Alessandro Brunetti, ISTAT. Demand side estimates, consumption, investment. What I'm saying in the presentation and what I wrote in the paper is built upon joint work with Massimiliano Iomi and again Alessandro Brunetti, both from ISTAT. All series are at current and constant prices. So we have deflators, sectoral deflators. This is, I think, one important result of our research. We put all our main results in an Excel dataset, which is being released today. And we also put some intermediate results, some byproduct, something which can be useful for researchers. But full information will be provided in a book to be published in the coming months and co-authored by all contributors to the research. And with the book, a new and more complete dataset will be provided. Let me give you an idea of the statistical material we have to manage, to work on in order to make our reconstruction work. We started from benchmarks. Benchmarks are detailed national account estimates for some key years. We started with blue ones, and they were estimated by the group coordinated by Guido Rei around 2000, 2002. Then we wanted to estimate another benchmark for 1871. And another group coordinated by Guido Rei produced another benchmark for 1970 they kindly provided their data, their unpublished data. We exploited some information from Ercolani and Foix national accounts, so the older historical national accounts for Italy. We used Fenoltea industry value added at constant prices for all sectors, industry sectors. Federico's agriculture data. Carreras and Felice industry value added as revised by Ferdinando Giuliano. The red items in this picture belong to our project. Battilani, Felice and Zamagni estimated new value added for services at current prices. And De Bonis, Farabullini, Rocchelli and Salvio provided new data for the financial sector. Istat was our main provider for 1951-1970 period. With this data, we could interpolate the benchmarks, we could reconstruct national accounts data, time series, and then we have to make a further step, to link these estimates with the official Istat data, 1970-2010. At this point, we could close our project with the national accounts time series covering the whole history of Italy. But how did we use all this data? Many details, a huge amount of details should be explained in order to understand what we did, and it's not possible to do it here. It was only partially possible in the paper. It will be fully possible in the book. In this presentation, I just provide you with a quick guide to our methodology, our research. So we started from benchmarks. Benchmarks are our cornerstones. So data contained in benchmarks are considered as given. We started from them, and all other time series was made consistent when they were made consistent with benchmarks. What are benchmarks in some more detail? Basically, benchmarks are supply and uses accounts for 25 sectors. They are at current prices and at current frontiers. And they provide also input-output matrices for the same 25 sectors. Here is a summary of the 25 sectors. So we have agriculture, we have 17 sectors for industry, and we have 7 sectors for services, 25. So now the question is, how can we interpolate our benchmarks? Of course, we have to exploit all this information. But how? Details, I cannot give you details, so I try to simplify the matter. I try to make a brief summary, just saying that in this information set, we have value added at current prices and or value added at constant prices and or implicit deflators, information about implicit deflators for each sector and for each sub-period. Of course, these 3 magnitudes are interlinked. When we know 2 of them, the other one is determined. It depends on which ones we know. And it depends also on which ones we deem to be the most reliable. Just to simplify the matter, I just say that we go on like this. We tried to assess the most reliable data. Then the third one was determined by the other 2. I just make an example. There are many cases. In one of the appendix of the paper, they are listed in detail. There are many cases, but I just make this example. I plotted in this picture, I plotted two pieces of information. The blue histograms are the benchmarks so the benchmark values for manufacturing value added. So they are at current prices and current frontiers. And I plotted a time series, which is the aggregate manufacturing value added at 1911 prices by Stefano Fenoltea, which was adapted to current frontiers to be consistent with the benchmarks. Given these numbers, we just calculate the ratio of the benchmark values to the Fenoltea's values, so current prices divided constant prices, in order to obtain benchmark deflators. So we have a deflator for each benchmark. We obtain these three numbers, which here I put on another graph. Now the problem is how to connect these three benchmarks, deflator benchmarks. We need some information about the rates of change between benchmarks. What we had was and is Ercolani's deflators for manufacturing value added. As you can see, is quite different in level from our numbers. So we only exploited its informational content related to rates of change. We interpolated our benchmarks and we obtained our new time series for manufacturing value-added deflator. Now we have this new deflator. We can go back to the previous picture in order to draw our new time series at current prices. This is a representative example about how we operated. We did it for each of our 11 sectors. And so let's play with deflators. We can do something that before it was not possible, because now we estimated these 11 deflators, one for each sector. And now we can do this exercise, which I am going to show you. And basically, if we change the base year for each sectors, we can reweight the aggregation at constant prices. So we can get new GDP series at constant prices with different base, taking into account the variation in relative prices. The result of this exercise is in this picture, where the main result, I don't go to comment this picture more than, I don't spend many words, but I just noticed that the earlier is the base, the steeper is the acceleration of GDP after 1885, after 1890. Now, we should analyze it. But then there was a further step, as I said before. After our estimation of the 1861-1970 period, which was obtained by interpolating our benchmarks, we have to link it to the official data. But benchmarks were constructed according to, they were not constructed according to European system of accounts. So I just call them pre-ESA standards. Whereas, of course, the official data, the newest data, are in ESA 1995. So we have to apply some modification, some changes to our series in order to obtain the longer series, 150 years series. In this table, I show you maybe the most important modification we have to do. So in this table, we have, in the first column, we have 25 sectors, benchmarks 25 sectors. In order to interpolate the benchmarks, we have to aggregate manufacturing and transportations and communications, depending on the availability of data. In order to obtain longer series, 150 years long series, we have to we ended up with only with 4 sectors. Let me spend some words about our demand side estimates. In this case, we could not rely on solid recent work as we could for the supply side. So we decided to be guided from the strongest part, that is from supply side estimate. So we considered our supply side estimates as a constraint to the demand side estimate. We exploit this basic national accounts identity, so GDP plus imports of goods and services minus exports. We consider this as an estimate of internal demand, consumption plus investment. So this estimate is the corridor in which our estimates, demand side estimates must fit. So we estimated private and public consumption and some categories of investment goods. With appropriate coefficients, we imposed to our estimates to comply with the constraint. This table is large. So in the first column, we have our main estimates. We have three categories of investment goods: constructions, plant machinery and transport equipments, other investment goods. We didn't make any estimate of inventory variations. Then we made another estimate which we regard as less robust than the first one. We disaggregated constructions and we estimated inventory variations. Finally, in order to link our estimates to the most recent official data, we have to make some more changes in the classifications, which are in the third column. Let me show, how many minutes do I have? Oh, okay. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, it's okay. Some graphs of our main results. Here I plotted constant prices GDP per capita. This is a semi-log scale, normalized at 1861 equals 0. So more or less it can be interpreted as, each point can be interpreted as a rate of variation with respect to the initial year. Here I have rates of change. I don't want to comment these graphs. I just want to show you the results. Maybe in another paper or other people will use and comment. This is a statistical reconstruction. I don't want to. So I go on, and this is an interesting graph where I plotted the percentage shares for agriculture, services, and industry in the first 50 years after unification. They are calculated at current prices, and also here we can play with our deflators. The main feature of this graph is you can see it. Industry percent shares is quite stable. We have a growing pattern for services and declining pattern for agriculture. Using deflators, I decompose the industry share in prices and quantity effect. So the stability of industry share is due to a declining price effect and a growing quantity effect. It is interesting to notice that the acceleration in the quantity effect is more or less located in the 80s and during the so-called Giolitti period. Here I show you a comparison of private consumption per capita. One novelty of our estimates is that in contrast with the earlier estimates, consumption per capita goes up actually during the 80s. It's not stagnating as before. Here, investment in plant, machinery and transport equipments. The difference, as you can see, is the steep acceleration until the crisis of 1907. And finally, I show you a comparison concerning the 1911-1951 period. The ovals highlight our main novelties. During the World War I, our series followed a much more moderate path, much more in line with other countries. And in the second oval, we have the Great Depression, the first Great Depression. The difference from the other series is that in our estimates, the Great Depression was much more in line with other countries, so it was deeper and much more persistent. And we are at the end. Conclusions. Actually, I could conclude just saying that we have a new national accounts dataset. This is the main conclusion, actually. But I just want to add a couple of words about the way we worked, the philosophy of our work, the way we are going to work, the way we want to work in the future. So our aim is to make all data and documentation easily accessible to scholars and students. And we regard our work as an open source enterprise. So we want everyone who wants to enter our kitchen to see what we cooked, how we cooked. Maybe if this person wants to cook something else in our laboratory. Replicability and detailed documentation are important new features of the data presented. And so, refinements and improvements that maybe, I'm sure, they are needed, are warmly encouraged by the transparency of our methodologies and assumptions. This is our commitment. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure that there are so many statisticians in this room, but they surely will appreciate the fact that you have done a big work on this subject. There are many economic aspects that should be also discussed, I guess, and perhaps in your book it will take place that part.
Can I add? We are going to organize a conference about this data with statisticians and historians, maybe around March, next March.
So, Professor de Jong, please.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to start with giving my congratulations to the author and his co-researchers for this major achievement. I think this is a very important achievement. Italy is now one of the few countries that has made serious work of establishing a second generation historical national accounts, and they did this once it became clear that the former historical national accounts did not suffice anymore. And the former ones were the historical national accounts made by the Istat estimations of 1957, 1958, and also the adjustments by Vitali. Well, this full second generation estimates already began years and years ago, and was directed at calculating additional new benchmarks and time series. So these revisions are not from the last few years. They have been published in the last 15 years by, for instance, Vera Zamagni, by Stefano Fenoaltea, by Guido Rey, and also by Giovanni Federico. And now there is a third generation of researchers working on this. And now this all has been brought together in one consistent and transparent framework. Not all has been uncovered yet. The present paper doesn't show all the series for the moment, and I think that's okay. I only have 15 minutes. But it also means that my comments will only scratch the surface of the results of this project. Well, let me concentrate this afternoon on 3 items that inspired me and also gave me some worries. First of all, I'd like to make a comparison with earlier Istat estimates that were more or less reproduced by Angus Maddison. Secondly, I also would like to stick a while with the numbers and figures of the first half of the 20th century. During this era, national and international economies were heavily struck by effects of the 2 world wars and the Great Depression. Alberto just talked about that. And also in Italy we had fascism, and there are ideas that fascism has fossilized the economic structure of Italy, but technological progress internationally was going on, and this created a backlog of opportunities that probably made possible the economic miracle of the 1950s and the 1960s. Well, we have to look very precisely at these breaks and these levels, because they may explain the precise nature of the post-Second World War boom in Italy. Was it reconstruction? Was it catch-up? Or was it structural change that made possible this very long boom? And thirdly, I'd like to talk very shortly about what we can say about the international performance of Italy. Given the new estimates that we have now, can we also get a new perspective on comparative levels and growth of Italy? But I also like to start with one statement that maybe is in place after the depressing discussion we had yesterday about the bad performance of present-day Italy. I think Italy, first of all, is a success story. This may be surprising from the 19th century perspective, but on the other hand, it's not surprising from the perspective of the early modern period. Italy has a long-standing tradition of urbanization. It was for a very long time the most urbanized country in the world, as the work of Paolo Malanima has shown. And Italian city-states were extremely rich, and per capita product until halfway the 18th century was higher than in Britain. But wages and also GDP per capita showed an ongoing decline after 1750. Okay, let's go to the new series then. So what you can see here in the present graph is a green series that is produced by Angus Maddison, but this is based on the older historical national accounts. And we see the red line, which is the present GDP estimate of the group of Baffigi. And on the whole, there is not much difference. And this may be viewed, you could see this as being very disappointing. But I can assure you, if you are working with historical national accounts, this is not the case. It's in fact reassuring that the present series is so close to the former series, and now you have the availability of much more detailed series. It would have been very strange if there would have been a very large difference between the present series and the former series. So it's reassuring. That's my first comment. The difference is especially large before the First World War, and this is caused by the fact that the estimates of Angus medicine, so the green ones, were partly built on a 1967 reconstruction of reported industries by Stefano Fenualtea, and this probably moved upwards his estimate. What we see now for the period shortly before the First World War is a steady development without accelerations. We don't have any takeoff, we don't have a great spurt, but we have a long swing with above average growth in the 1880s. Talking about the estimates of Fenualtea, these are very important in this project. Stefano Fenualtea also had a higher level for the 1911 benchmark compared with the former ones, and this is a very important pillar in the project. And I think in your paper you should explain a little bit better what is the cause of these different level estimates. Yeah, so that's still not clear to me. And if you look at these series, the present series that are now on the slide, you cannot see this higher level anymore. So there is something wrong between 1911 and 1990. Probably this has to do with your deflation. Talking about deflation, we also have to talk about prices, but let me first show you the next graph. Here you can see on a year-to-year basis the difference between the present estimate and the estimate of Angus medicine. The gray line is the yearly difference. I also made a smooth line with a 5-year average, and what you can see is that before the First World War there is a big difference. So the present estimates is at lower growth rates than the former estimate. We also can see that this is the case for the 1930s, and this also was mentioned by Alberto. Also in the 1930s we see a downward adjustment of GDP growth. Okay, talking about prices. Sectoral deflators. This is one of the new and characterizing elements of the new database, as you state yourself. It's not in the paper, but it's calculated by me. I took the current and the constant price series, and in the graph you can see the implicit deflators for agriculture, industry, services, consumption, and GDP, the GDP deflator. Well, at the moment the paper shows a little bit of an ambivalent position concerning the price deflators, and that worries me a little bit. Let's concentrate here on the series between 1861 and 1911. The present procedure assumes similar productivity growth across the big sectors for the first 20 years of the period. Furthermore, it uses only one deflator, one price index for the total economy. If you do this, these methods in fact define away the fast-growing sectors before 1911. So it is not so surprising that changes in the base years of the deflation procedure, and you just showed it to us, do not make a large difference in this period. There were no changes by definition. So in my view they were defined away. Especially between 1861 and 1911 we see relative price declines in manufacturing. You can see that the blue line is going much lower than, for instance, agriculture. If you apply the current prices of 1911, you seriously underestimate levels and growth in the industrial sector in the previous 50 years. So it dampens the measured growth of sectors that have faced relative price declines before 1911, which may have been the most dynamic sector. So maybe you just showed a few graphs explaining what is really happening with the volumes and the prices. But if you express industrial growth in constant prices, then you can much better analyze how industry and service and agriculture grew vis-à-vis each other. So this is the same graph as you just showed, sectoral value added. And what surprises me is that industry is at such a low level. It's not a surprise because you express it in current prices. But if you want to see how industry moved and how productivity growth has changed industrial value added, then it would also be nice if you could express these in constant prices with a fixed base year. Shift share analysis, doing it in current prices, shift share analysis won't say anything about the process of growth. So I wholeheartedly support your idea to reconstruct deflators for the fast-growing sectors, especially in manufacturing. Even in the study of Giorgio Fua of 1965, it is shown that manufacturing had the highest percentage share in the increment of total value added, especially when you measure it in constant prices. And also in the paper of Broadberry, Giordano and Zolino, we also will have this afternoon, it is stated that manufacturing is the most dynamic sector, in fact, during the whole period. Okay, let's move back to the first graph. The second point I'd like to mention here is the enigma of periods of fast growth during the World War I years. It has been pointed out that Italian growth during the First World War was a little bit outrageous. Again, we can see from the 1965 study of Fua that there was a 5 to 8 times rise in government output. I can believe that. Probably this is the case, but you cannot expect an 8-time rise in government output without fast declining value added in the private sectors. So obviously there has been some sort of a mismeasurement in this period. And I think this second generation series has repaired that. However, it is not clear to me how this new revision precisely has been established. So I think this also needs more explanation. The same can be said for the fast rise in the early 1920s, which is amazing, with 60% rise in manufacturing in 4 years, between 1921 and 1925. You should explain that also, and you should also explain the downward adjustment, you just mentioned it, the downward adjustments for 1930s. You should explain them also more. They were made by Ferdinando Giuliano, and I think it would be nice if we can have a closer look at these figures also. Let's move on to levels and growth rates. So these revisions make the interwar period a very interesting period to study. In fact, the whole period 1973, what Bob Gordon has called the one big wave of productivity growth.
Sorry, you have 2 minutes, please.
2 minutes, perfect. What you can see here is the estimate of the present group and the estimate of Angus Madison. What especially is astonishing is the growth between 1950 and 1973 with 5.2. This is very high growth, I think only surpassed by Japan, but I didn't put it in the table. And also the period 1913-1973 is a period with fast growth of GDP per capita with 2.5. So Italy really is a success story. And we can also see this in the paper that will be treated in the second part of this afternoon, where Steve Broadberry and his co-authors have established a growth of total factor productivity of 2.5, also in the same period. And this is very high. And For me, it means that there were more countries in Europe that also had this one big wave of fast economic growth that probably can be connected to the second industrial revolution of electrification and motorization of the economy. Okay, then my last point, 1 minute. What is not touched upon in this paper are the international comparisons. But I discovered that there is a separate paper this afternoon. Anyway, you can see in the graph that Italy, which is the red line, is a follower country with, but a strong one. And although after 1995 growth fell below the European average, until this era of growth in Italy was quite fast. The last indicator that I like to give is not about GDP per capita, but more about labor productivity. So this might be seen as a sort of technology indicator. Earlier benchmarks have established that the position of the labor productivity, so this means GDP per worker, compared with Great Britain, started at 40%, then rose to 50%, almost 50% in 1911, almost to 100% in 1987. And there was even what you call a sorpassio or sorpasso, so that the Italian economy surpassed Britain. If you look at manufacturing alone, which is one of the driving sectors in the economy, you see much lower levels. But I took them from Bardini, and these are old estimates, but the levels are quite low here. So you might ask the question whether the technology path that Italy took was as successful as the path that you can see for total GDP per man hour. Okay, so I leave it with here. Yeah.
So we have 15 minutes of discussion from the floor. Sarcinelli.
As you know, Mr. Chairman, I am no statistician, so I am not going to raise a very profound question. Mr. Baffigi, besides the congratulations, I would like to ask whether you are planning, in a sense, a division of the country between 1943 and 1945. Can you hear me?
C'è un po' di rimbombo.
Rimbomba un po'.
Sì.
Can you hear me now?
Better.
Well,
Hello.
there was a graph, one of the last that you showed, in which the trough for prices was in 45. Now, we all know, especially from what Mr. Baffigi wrote many years ago, especially in 1944, the level of prices in the South was already going up, while the system of price control in the northern part of the country was still in force. So de facto we had two regimes, two countries, and two rates of inflation. So the question is, are you planning, in a sense, for the period in which the country was not even nominally one, to calculate different rate of growth and different rate of inflation? Thank you. If you, of course, you can do it also in the past if you have, in a sense, overtaken Einstein law.
Thank you. Other? Please.
I'm very much impressed by the work you and your team have done, and I'm very interested. Yeah. Well, you never know with these beasts. Now, I wanted first to start by congratulating you by the amazing effort you and your team have done. And I would like to ask you about this. I think it's a very delicate issue. How to interpolate benchmarks. And how do you interpolate benchmarks? Because the story, the example you gave us using Stefano Fenoltea's figures is probably the easiest one you can provide. But let's imagine that you have these beautiful benchmarks built by Guido Rey's team, but then the only evidence you have, and this is what happens for the interwar period, is the evidence from the old Ercolani-Foix project. And then you start with 1911 and you project the 1911 benchmark with the rate of variations of the Ercolani-Foix series, and then you do the same starting, say, in 1951. You're going to have two different levels, same dynamics, but obviously different levels. How you solve that problem? Are you using a weighted geometric average, variable weighted geometric average of the two of them? Are you just relying on one benchmark? Because I think this is an important issue. As you know probably much better than I do, the problems of at the time of El Sorpaso, when Italy suddenly increased its GDP level by 25%. Problem is that these national accountants usually couldn't care less about the past. All they care is about rate of variation. But if you want to look at levels in the long run, you need to allow for the fact that you can end up having incredibly high levels. And this is the reason why Angus Madison was writing that paper. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
There is another.
No. Okay, I really wanted to just comment on this as a user of Italian historical national accounts, and I think in many ways this chart is very convenient because from my viewpoint it actually solves almost all the major problems that we've had in fitting Italy into the international economic history of the period from 1861 to the present. Now the first one you can see, and it's already been commented on, is what happens in World War I. I mean, the sort of green line, the old series, is just preposterous. There's no way that could have happened. It's just absolutely out of line with the performance of any other country during World War I. And the new series makes so much more sense. I think we have to really welcome this. Then, as we go on, we get into the interwar period, the fascist period. It's always been a slight embarrassment that the old series show Italy doing well and catching up on other countries. That's kind of gone now. Then we move into the post-war period. We get dramatic growth during the post-war golden age and the kind of catching up that we would expect. So I really think you've provided sort of the solution to all our problems. But nevertheless, I think Leandro's right to raise the issue of combining the benchmarks and the time series projections. We found in our paper, as you'll hear this afternoon, some issues about the levels, fitting it in so that Il Sorpaso doesn't occur too early is quite difficult. So yes, I think in terms of interpretation, these national accounts are a dramatic improvement on the old ones. But secondly, I think Leandro's right. We do have to worry about the combination of the benchmarks and the time series evidence. You've solved it by putting a sort of 100% weight on the benchmarks. That does create difficulties of reconciliation with the time series projections.
Thank you. I should have liked to make a lot of discussion, so it's not fair for the chairman. So I give the floor to Baffigi, please.
So, thank you, Herman, for your discussion. Thank you for your questions. There are many questions. I try to answer. Mr. Sarcinelli. There are many topics which can be developed from this research. We have a list, and then in the future we are going to select something more, maybe also different on the territories, and this is one topic we can consider. So, and so I try to answer to some of Herman's observations. I wrote something, for example, okay, explaining the differences with Finaltea's data. I think in the very first years of the series, I think you meant 1861. The difference is due to the new services value added. In our project, we made, as I showed you before, Battilani, Felice, and Zamagni estimated new values added in services at current prices. Then Alessandro Bonetti and myself, following some lines suggested by Battilani, Felice, and Zamagni, we estimated a series at constant prices. And while in another part of the first 50 years, we are not very different from Finaltea's data. In the very first years, we are not so close. And you can see it in the GDP. This is one point. Sectoral deflators. I don't remember if in the paper I sent you and you read, I already put the graph I showed you before, the two graphs, the one with different base year, and the one decomposing the industry share. Maybe I didn't put.
No, I've seen
it could, but so don't think it's. I think the answer is there. I mean, you can see that the quantity effect is pushing up. And what I think I didn't say in my presentation is I think that graph suggests a line of research. I mean, we have only 11 sectors, and manufacturing, which is very heterogeneous sector, is just one sector aggregated. So a line of research should be to try to estimate new deflators to disaggregated manufacturing. I think this could be a good answer. Otherwise, we can only make some hypothesis about. I cannot answer. I need some more data. That is, and what else? The differences over the World War I. I think it's the same answer I gave you for the difference between our estimate and Finaltea's. We have new estimates for services, and that steep acceleration over the World War I was mainly due to public administration, and we revised a lot this with our new estimates. The problem of interpolation. Between 1911 and 1951, actually, we have new estimates. We didn't use only Ercolani and Foix. We have Ferdinando Giuliano's paper, where new estimates for industry value added from 1928 to 1938 are provided, and he revised actually the Carreras and Felice data. So they are quite new. They are very new. They are very different from the other, for the earlier version, for the earlier estimates. And we have also, in this case, the same answer. We have new estimates for services value added. So we have new data for that period. In some cases, when we didn't have anything else, okay, we have to use Ercolani Foix, and we interpolated by geometric average, and this is what we did. So this is my answer. I think Professor Broadberry said something about the differences between medicine and our new estimates. This is a good point. I was speaking about it also with Herman. He knows medicine estimates very well, and I think I did an exercise in an appendix of the paper. I put the methodology I used to make like medicine estimates, to translate our new GDP in Euricamis international dollar. We have some problems, interpretation problems, because we have some differences. I think that medicine adjusted GDP, Italian GDP series, because he didn't believe in the underground economy reevaluation, and so there are some differences, and I don't know. I think they are not fully documented, so it could be useful to exchange some information about this issue, which is very important for international comparison. I don't know. I think, as far as I know, I answered to everything, but I'm sure I forgot something, but I hope it's enough. Thank you.
Thank you.